I believe there's some luck and some result of hyperactivity. We were young people. We looked for action. And the tiny dimensions of the Israeli kind of military organization and even the dimensions of the country enables you, if you are active enough, to be able to at least try to be where the action really is. And I remember, for example, in the 6 Days War, I commanded a small reconnaissance unit, and it took us just 4 days to reach the canal. And immediately I asked myself, okay, nothing is going to happen here anymore, so we jumped a few hundred miles to the other side. Maybe something will happen, the Golan Heights, and it happened that we came at the last hours of preparation for climbing on the Golan Heights, so we joined the Golan Heights battle as well, beginning at the northern edge and ending in at Quneitra. But, you know, I'm smiling, kind of recalling it now, but I should admit the first battles were quite a devastating kind of or revealing experience. My first real battle experience was in a 6 Days War. Few operations before then, but on a small scale. And the real experience, the memories of tough, demanding psychological environment where most people are tending to lose their sense of direction and cohesion of action, and the vehicles exploding around you, people killed, the bitter, sweet smell of human burnt bodies all around, the feeling of being not in full control. You are not in full control. And at the same time, the understanding of what I call the advantage of being a commander. You know, I always used to tell young officers, since I entered battle as an officer, I never experienced it as a soldier. I told them, you are lucky to become officers in operations, since officers have to care about what happens with their unit. They have a commitment to lead. So you will be always under the burden of identifying what happens, deciding what should be done, issuing orders, and looking around that someone follows them, that something happens, and then it changes the situation. And the other side also is acting, and everything is flowing around you, and you have to continuously keep it running. What is the situation? What's happening? What should be done about it? How to spread the orders, and how to watch that they are fulfilled. And under battle, unlike exercises, it's unbelievably, the simplest operations become unbelievably tough. It's like burden on all the people. People become paralyzed. Some of them that was so kind of easygoing and kind of hyper before battle become totally paralyzed. They don't hear well. Everyone tends to stay behind cover. To move a unit to assault is infinitely complicated. You know, it's, first of all, personally, you are paralyzed by the shooting. You are confident that once you raise your head over, you will get a bullet at your head. It's only the eyes of your own soldiers that you know, that they know, that you are committed to lead them. They expect you to do something. You cannot avoid it. You cannot live there and leave them kind of paralyzed. They will sink into it. And they need this commitment that had been shaped. Tito said that a good military unit is a social cell where shame, the fear of being kind of shamed by the rest of the group is stronger than the fear of death. And there is something true about it that works among youngsters, well-trained, and somehow understanding that they are serving a cause which is somehow more important than their own. No one really bothers during a battle with this kind of overstructure of ideology and devotion and so on, and we know, unfortunately, from world experience that you can lead people to highly devoted and professional military activities under terrible kind of regimes with terrible ideologies. But somehow with youngsters, it works, that if they got young leaders and they are trained together, they create this kind of self-reliance of the unit, so that they are not dependent on what happens in other parts of the battlefield. But they rely upon each other. It works, and they can reach kind of activities that are against, may I say, the individual instincts of anyone in the group. In battlefield situation, it's more a kind of combination of responses that had been kind of imprinted upon ourselves. We imprinted, commanders, upon ourselves, but the soldiers feel that it had been imprinted upon them, maybe about automatic kind of certain sets of automatic responses that make everyone feels better. And then it's a swift decisions, sometimes in a kind of split seconds, sometimes split moments, depends on what level, that are not the result of huge analytical work. It's on the battlefield itself. No one will move if you are not moving. I used to tell my company commanders, if I, the battalion commander, will not go to fire position, open fire, and then give commands, no one will move. And if you, company commanders, will not be the first one to climb to fire position, every other tank crew will find some excuse not to climb, and we have to do it the first, and you don't have time. You somehow, I believe that many good commanders in the field just somehow can make their overall judgment very quickly. I can compare it to something in which I'm very weak, but I watch it. The way that tennis players are responding. They're not calculating. If you had to write the Newtonian equations of the moving of the tennis ball and what you should done, or not to mention the Schrödinger equations of it, you will never end it. You just do what should be done, and you don't assess whether I should do this way or this way. You just do what should be done. I believe that it's only on the higher level, when you command a division or corps, which happened to me, that you have enough time to contemplate. But then you face the other end of the spectrum, that you think that you control, but if you are kind of honest enough with yourself, you know that you don't have full control. It is really decided by the fighting spirit and the performance and the determination of the young company commanders and at most battalion commanders in the direct line of fire. First of all, I had a lot of experiences where I have to change kind of dress. I still remember an operation where we had some of our pilots taken by the Egyptians during the war of attrition. They intercepted some of them with some missiles, and we decided that the only way to convince the Egyptians to release them is by taking some Egyptian pilots and bring them to Israel, and then suggest that we will kind of exchange them. And the only way that we found was to stop at a road leading to a Egyptian Air Force back deep in the Nile Valley. And by appearing as Egyptian military police to move them from the road and to take over some pilots. And I initiated such a raid, and I was one of the two policemen with a motorcycle, fully dressed as an Egyptian MP, with someone who talked Baladi, kind of a street Egyptian, much better than I could, in a much more convincing way. And we really made it, and we established a kind of checkpost on the road to an Egyptian Air Force base, and we begin to take vehicles at midnight. There was not a lot of transportation. We ended up with some 40 people and some 6 or 8 trucks and vehicles, and not a single man in uniform. They were all Egyptian civilians. One had a small pistol, and that's it. You know, years ago, years later, when I told the Mubarak this story when I was already Prime Minister, he joked he was himself a commander of the Egyptian Air Force. And he told me that Egyptian pilots are more disciplined. They are not spreading around in the streets after midnight. They're coming to sleep well at night at the Air Force base. But he was furious, even in retrospect, by the kind of chutzpah that we got to take Egyptian uniform and motorcycles and so on. But you know, so I looked at the dressing of overalls as just a means to kind of make the surprise higher. We faced trying to storm. I had to storm a hijacked Sabina kind of airplane with some 107 hostages in it, held by a group of gunmen, two terrorists and 2 female, with some hand grenades, some ammunition, and some pistols and some explosives. And we realized that unless we can do it in a way that they will be personally surprised, and a split second after they realize that we are attacking them, they should be defending themselves. Otherwise, they will have enough time to maybe to connect to activate the explosive or to throw some hand grenades on the passengers and explode the whole thing. So first, I've sort of taking it over at night. I used to do almost everything which is useful at night, so you can come closer, no one can. But there were a lot of hesitations in the upper echelons. Moshe Dayan and the then chief of staff, and even Golda Meir at the Jerusalem office, hesitated about what will happen. They tried, maybe we can negotiate them, maybe they will be weak and give up before it deteriorates. So we found ourselves had to do it in daytime. In daytime, you cannot come close. And it was not my idea. It was raised by someone in the headquarters. So one of the generals said, why don't we go closer to the airplane? Kind of disguise ourselves or cover ourselves as mechanics who are preparing it for taking off. And we even took some 100 young soldiers and some adult, gave them prison kind of suits to represent the Arab released terrorists that are coming from the prison. So they will see that everything is okay. And we took ourselves on a kind of trolleys that are small cars that are working in airport. We created a train and we went there with overall nothing but small pistols underneath and some ladders to climb it. And we trained ourselves for about half an hour, maybe 45 minutes, how to storm the airplane, how to open the emergency door from the outside, and how to climb from the nose wheel gear into the cockpit directly. And we went to do it. And I felt what really worried me is the possibility that we will do everything okay, but in the few seconds since the beginning of the assault and the actual facing of these terrorists, they can explode the whole thing together with us. And there was no solution for it. We just had to do it effective way. Fear is something very normal. You have to overcome it. But I remember it more as an experience of pre-battle, before the operation, than something that really strikes you during it. It comes to your awareness only when you sit idle, where some circumstances compel you or impose upon you lack of action, not to do anything. Then it works very effectively. It works on every human beings, including commanders, including experienced commanders. And in fact, you see the people around you. It's kind of luck joins us, not just in the kind of turns that lead me into this unit or someone else to another place, but also during battle. You know, I've seen some of my best friends that could become prime ministers and professors and leaders of the Israeli society on every field of life, just out of something that no one controls. They got the series of bullets into their chest or head or neck, and you know, I still remember on my tank at the height of the Yom Kippur War, a lieutenant colonel, a brilliant officer, a brilliant scientist, in fact, that was in his youth a commander in the parachutists, but then a commander in a leading high-tech of that time, high-tech confidential unit. But when he heard that there is a battle, he came to like a horse that smells it. And he joined us as a fifth member of the crew beyond what we happened. And we were at the height of the battle shooting at Egyptian tanks from some 1,000 meters and Egyptian soldiers just under our feet. And Egyptian missiles from the flank from some 2.5 kilometers. And he was shot at from maybe 10 yards. From someone that we have seen before. We've tried to crash him with the how you call it, with the chains of the tank. But when we rolled back to crash someone else, it came out that he comes out of his foxhole and raised his Kalashnikov once again and shot my friend here. And I still remember, you know, kind of, he just turned to me and said something like this, kind of maybe a foot and a half kind of stream of blood from his neck. And I tried to stop it, and it was heavy enough to slip into the turret, and he lost his life a few minutes later. I lost my best friends in battlefield, and especially Yom Kippur War. The war caught me at Stanford University. I was a graduate student. Maybe some 6 weeks. You know, I came to the 73 year, and it just began, you know. And I was called from the Yom Kippur, California. Yom Kippur was already, you know, coming 10 hours later than in Israel. So we were just after the Yom Kippur ceremony in the kind of Hillel auditorium of Stanford University, when I woke up in the morning, told that there is a war in Israel. I called the attaché in the embassy, say, I'm Lieutenant Colonel, I'm moving immediately. So the general there told me, I don't think we are missing a major war. I told him, I asked him, what is we? You are here an official role. I'm a student. I'm a commander. I cannot afford being out of the country, even if in a not very serious kind of war. I'm going there. I will call you from New York. And I went immediately to the airport, San Francisco airport. I kissed my wife. My eldest daughter was maybe 2 years old. She's now here with us, a corporate lawyer in Manhattan. But she was 2 years old, and I went back. I came only, I couldn't call my wife in 3 weeks. She was left in the hands of the Palo Alto Jewish community and some students that stayed there. I commanded the tank battalion, some of the most bitter battles I ever participated in. And I still remember when I called her from Suez after we kind of encircled the Third Army at the end of the war. And I began to read to her the names of our friends that were lost. Most of them company commanders and battalion commanders that lost their lives since they were the first to climb to fire positions. And I remember her crying in the telephone. She was watching in the CBS, something that was inconceivable for us, Egyptian infantry crossing the canal, Israeli soldiers and officers prisoned at the hands of Egyptians. She couldn't hear from me. It took me 4 or 5 months to come back to Stanford to take her. I could not continue the studies there. But the memory was there that how good it was, and I came there 5 years later to complete my graduate studies as a colonel. Oh, it's a kind of communal farm, so to speak, where some 60 families were living together, supposedly according to a principle that everyone should give according to his skills and get according to his needs, but with, may I say, very modest interpretation of human needs. In present terms, it would become a poverty, but we never felt this way. It's, you know, my parents had a residence which was a room of 12 by 9 foot, no running water, no toilets. The whole commune was dining collectively in one big room that was called dining room. And even the bath where it could take shower was some collective installation. 2 of them, of course, for males and females, but that was the only kind of differentiation. And may I say a long, hard working week from early dawn to sunset. We, the kids, were raised from age of 0 in kind of collective dormitories apart from our parents, but still I recall it as a kind of, I say happy, kind of happy, warm childhood. We felt that I at least was kind of lucky to get a lot of warm care, kind of not just nursing, but in a way coaching by my parents in the 4 or 5 hours a day, high quality time. The 5 or 4 or 5 hours that we spent together every day. And, you know, I was there for 18 years and a few years were into my adult life. But I still remember it very warmly. It was remote, far isolated, small, tough conditions, but somehow we feel a part of the nation of Israel, emerging nation of Israel, part of the Jewish world, part of the world as a whole. We had a small radio. We listened to everything that happened around the world as kids, as young kids, and somehow our parents gave us the the feeling of being both well taken care of young individuals and part of something wider than we as individuals are. I was born in the middle of World War II. Rommel divisions were at the gate of Egypt, and there was for sometimes a real fear that he will take over the Middle East from the British. This was about the time that the parents of my mother were taken to Treblinka. We did not knew it at the time. The parents of my father were murdered in a pogrom before the First War when he was 2.5 years old, so I never knew my grandparents. So somehow, when I look at it at retrospect, I should grow up in a confident kind of environment, but this was not the case. I was 8.5 years when the State of Israel established, and I still remember the evening, the counting of votes at Lake Success, and the eruption of emotions immediately afterwards from all around the kibbutz. All the kibbutz practically went around a campfire and danced to the morning, and the other morning we were at war. And at certain point we could hear the mortars of the Iraqi unit that came and almost cut Israel into two. We were 3 or 4 miles from the seashore at the very narrowest part of Israel, and we at one morning could hear the mortars, but I didn't recall a sense of fear all along these years. We became aware of the price where one member of the kibbutz was fallen during the war, and later on when I was youngsters and elderly youngsters in the kibbutz joined the army, and one of them was killed. But basically, I don't remember fear. Maybe the closed climate around us kind of isolated us, or maybe my parents or our parents deliberately isolated us from the fears of life at this early stage. I remember something very warm, very kind of supporting, and encouraging and still keeping. You know, I remember my father taught me everything, how to take the needles out of these kids where you have to move needle by needle without moving the rest of them, how to play chess, or how to climb a tree. Always, whenever I looked, I knew that his hand is somehow behind me to make sure that I will not fall, or at least not fall too much, or from too high kind of part of a ladder. I was a shy, small size, almost tiny, almost always looked behind the wave of kind of coming to maturity. I joined the school at the age of 5 plus few months. I was a shy introvert boy, totally not in tune with the rest of the group. We were a very small group as a result of the size of the commune, but out of kind of 13 or 14 boys and girls in the class, I was a little bit strange when I look at it from the hindsight. I never played basketball, in fact, until the age of 12. I couldn't throw the ball, so it will reach the basket. The girls in my class, most of them were running the 60-yard track faster than me. I tried once to play soccer, but I ended up at the defense, kicking the knees of the other side rather than the ball, not deliberately, but so I concentrated on reading. I read a lot. I played the piano. I found my own way. I picked locks. I was highly interested in mechanics, in fine mechanics, understanding how things are working. I was very clumsy on the big motoric movement and very accurate on the delicate ones. May I say, nothing to predict a future decorated soldier or a general or a leader. I read the beginning what my father gave me. He was focused on science, on opening the world to me, on science, on culture, on music, and I read a lot. But I read a lot of, adventures books. I still remember Jack London, the experience of the crew of a vessel at storm kind of haunted me. And I was reading a lot of Karl May, and it's a German kind of writing that from prison described the Wild West that he never kind of visited. It's Jules Verne, of course, I read a lot. And when I came a little bit older, I read, of course, Tolstoy's War and Peace. And I'm still, to this day, I believe that I disappointed my father by being unable to complete Jean-Christophe. There were some readings that he said, you are not a real human being before you read them. I believe that until now, I didn't read some of them fully. But he was they encouraged me in more than one way to be curious, to learn. I was maybe 14 years old when he brought me a book by Gamov about the sun and the birth and the death of our sun, which was a kind of popularized version of how the sun is burning out and about the origins of universe. And he was, I believe, interested in pushing me gradually toward science or influencing me indirectly to become a scientist. I've just heard, Steve Rosenberg here in this event, kind of talking about the Nobel Prize address of Isidore Rabi, and it kind of shivers in my spine. I remember my own father, which is now 91 years old, repeating to me once and again this point from Isidore Rabi's story about how he became a scientist. That he said the most influential moment was that his mother repeatedly, when he used to come back from school at very early age of 8 or 9, asking him, Isidore, have you asked a kind of a good question today? Not what you have learned, not what you have absorbed, but have you raised a good question today? And it seems that in spite of differences, Steve Rosenberg, maybe it's a leading kind of scientist and surgeon, and myself, we are about the same age. Maybe I'm a few years older, and in different corners of the world, our parents used to tell us somehow similar stories. I was highly interested in mathematics. That seemed to me to be a form of art, something very beautiful, geometry and mathematics, and the systematic way how it's built and so on. But I was somewhat bored by most of other issues that were taught at school, and I became at the age of from 13 maybe to 17, I was totally undisciplined and could not take any kind of discipline. So gradually I became a burden of the school, and they asked me to go to something more productive. Maybe I don't know, not hyperactive, I was a very shy introvert, but to do something useful, to work in the field, rather than spend my time and interrupting others that want to study. So I learned, I was expelled from high school in the last year. I was allowed to come to listen to the mass hours. And I spent the rest of the day working until I joined the army at very early age. It was a great disappointment to my father. He was one of few adults in the kibbutz that had a university background. In his own past, he highly appreciated the value of good education. And as I already described, he tried to convince me to take this. And I kept telling him, Dad, when I will be ripe for it, I will do it. I cannot do something that I don't feel really in it or kind of identifying with, and I cannot lie to myself. And he told me, you are herring out, you are fleeing of yourself. It's no way that you will not learn ultimately, so why to waste these precious years? And I told him, I'm not there. I don't know how to explain it. It was a major disappointment for him that he carried with him for a very long time. It was not very usual, but not very unusual at the same time. You know, we didn't have a school system at the time that would prepare the students for college. No matriculation, no formal systematic coverage of a certain syllabus or curriculum that will enable you to enter. It was kind of rural, remote school system, very caring, very open, very encouraging kind of do it your way, which is very modern today, but without kind of sets of standards that should be achieved. And practically I began to learn systematically only when I was adult. It's about 23 or 24 when I made my matriculation, when I was already an operational officer in the armed force. I joined the army at the age of 17 and a half, which was quite unusual. My mother had to sign that she agrees that I go before age. I was still looked like a child, a youngster, 15 years old. I joined a unit at a boot camp. I could not even jump over the wall in the obstacles, you know. Decades later, I've seen a movie with Goldie Hawn starring Private Benjamin, how she jumped, and it reminds me myself. I couldn't jump over the wall, and I was physically so kind of immature that the very carrying of all these ammunition, all the equipment, create a very tough, demanding kind of physically demanding experience for me. But then, during these very few months, 6 months of boot camp, came a defining moment for me. It was early 1960. Some night, Israeli intelligence got a hint from the CIA that 2 Egyptian divisions are already deployed deep into the Sinai desert, very close to the Israeli border. No one knew about it, of course, and it created an immediate emergency through the whole army. Israel had a very small, regular standing army, and it had to deploy immediately along the border to avoid a surprise attack, which is the kind of trauma that accompanies Israel defense kind of thinking all along. There was in the unit an emergency need to spread convoys of ammunition to maybe a dozen of different points along the border, some of them 50 miles away from the boot camp. And as a result of the need to prepare at the same time all the units, there was a a shortage of officers or NCOs that could lead an ammunition convoy to some desert place. And we, the boot camp trainees, were asked whether someone of us know to read map and can lead a convoy, a dark night, to a certain position 50 miles from here. No one responded. And it seemed to be a kind of real emergency. And I thought I can. So I raised my hand and I say, I think I can do it. I had some experience in reading maps from summer camps and summer treks, where I made the point of always knowing exactly where I was. So I get acquainted to looking at the maps, and it seemed to me that I understand it, I can read it. And I still to this day remember the eyes of the battalion commander when he released me into the darkness, kind of contemplating what will happen if I cross the border with the convoy or something else, who will be responsible. But in a way, he didn't have an alternative at the moment, and he sent me. Along the way, I had my own moments of doubt, of course, but finally I did it. We reached the point, and as a kind of course, I learned a lesson my own lesson from it, but somehow the kind of spin-off of this story led me to the leading kind of commando unit of the Israeli Defense Forces, the kind of equivalent of the Delta Forces here, long before the Delta Forces were established, or the British Special Air Service, after whom we kind of adopted their slogan, "Who dares wins." I believe that I already came from my childhood with the kind of feeling somehow that the fact that I'm slightly different doesn't mean that I'm worse or somehow. It doesn't should not kind of deter me from trying to do things. It's just a matter of fact. I cannot throw the ball to the basket, so I cannot become a basketball player. But it somehow did not deter me. Somehow I came out of childhood with kind of self-confidence, or not self-confidence in things that I cannot do, but in kind of calibrated assessment of what I can do, and with a basic sense of direction of what I can do, a sense of judgment, maybe supported by the warmth that I absorbed. When I think about it in retrospect, the most kind of imprinting was the kind of adult care, but not over care, that gradually nurtures self-confidence in a youngster. So in a way, I owe it to my parents, who are now 91 and 87 respectively. And I believe that they, without maybe being aware of it, gave me my basic self-confidence that I can do. Later on, this was a kind of defining moment in retrospect, kind of juncture of luck. I would not be able to enjoy or to experience what I experienced later on without this moment. But at the moment, it was kind of an expression of seriousness. I felt in the air that something very serious is happening, and that I could identify the stress on the eyes of our commanders when they looked among the youngsters that just joined the army to someone who can read the map and take such a convoy. And I volunteered many times, but it seemed to me that I tried to ask myself whether I can do it. I thought, yeah, I think I can do it. Yeah, it might not be easy, but I can do it. And at the moment that I answered, I didn't realize how complicated it could be in the dark. You can see nothing. It's a plain. There is not even roads, and you have to try to assess the direction, the compass, and there is no settlement and so on. And you should count the mileage before you cross the border into Egypt. Maybe there is nothing on the border that will tell you that you are crossing the border. But it somehow reassured me, but I don't remember it as something dramatic personally. And it happened to me once and again, all my life, after in this initial event, going in the dark of the desert to find certain spot, as well as later on in long range desert navigation exercises. I really felt that somehow when many others lose their sense of directions, all the skyline or the contours of all the hills around look the same, that I feel that I know where to go. And something similar happened to me many times during the height of a battle. I feel that somehow I can look at it not just out of my own body as an individual that cares about himself, but I can look at it from the outside and certain, in a way, during the battle, at certain aspects, it was less kind of hurting you from your stomach than before. When before you are idle, when you have nothing to do but to contemplate what could happen, you became more kind of irritated than once it begins. You have a role, you have something to do, it depended upon you. You have to keep yourself detached a little bit, looking at all pictures, giving orders, otherwise your people will be lost and your unit will be lost and you will lose. And somehow this kind of feeling that I can see what happens. I do not lose sight of what happens all around, what should be done, and I do not get panic is what kind of encouraged me to keep doing it. First of all, I should admit that I was somehow lucky. But in retrospect, maybe it means that somehow kind of inner sense of direction and, kind of self-control is more important even in such a profession as the military profession, at least in modern life, it's more important than many physical kind of qualities. And of course, long years, I gained some 3 inches in height and some 30 pounds in weight, muscles during my service. And I didn't shave till deep into the 3rd year in service, but later on I became a physically kind of a well-shaped youngster. It was just, I came too early. I don't know, I believe that it emerged gradually, and maybe when I was a young lieutenant, I had a commander that his name is not known here, it's but well known in Israel, called Avraham Arnan. He was my colonel, and he trusted me somehow. He sensed somehow something that I sensed in myself, that under a kind of uncertain and somewhat disturbing and threatening situation, I didn't lose my judgment of the overall situation and the sense of details that makes the difference, and the sense of action, that something should be done about it. You should not just observe it, you should do something about it. But then, I got another mentor that escorted me for many years. It was Yitzhak Rabin. As a result of the tiny size of the Israeli army, before sensitive operations, even a young lieutenant like me was taken to the chief of staff, commander of the armed forces, to be briefed and debriefed before an operation. So I was exposed, let's say, to the supreme command. In fact, I was exposed to Rabin, but in a circumstance which meant a lot for me, but not for him. I excelled at officer school, so to the first 5 or 6 students, Rabin gave the second lieutenant kind of ranks personally. So we have a picture together, but he, of course, cannot even recall it. But some 2 years later, I was in a unit that somehow was lucky enough to be sent to solve the most delicate and demanding operational problems of the state of Israel. Some of them are still kind of out of the public awareness, or the public doesn't know about them even after 40 years. But there were very delicate missions that could draw Israel into a big trouble if they become become complicated during operation, or get into troubles during operation. And we got something which is not typical to armed forces. Namely, they are very bureaucratic, very hierarchical, very kind of... And I feel that as if I spent the first 15 years of my military career out of armed forces. We used to wear civilian clothes. We were allowed to contemplate whatever we need in order to approach the problem. Full kind of freedom for imagination and for creative kind solutions. And once again, the kind of the Isidore Rabi question about a story about knowing to raise the right question helps you to shape the right answers about how to solve. So unlike what you typically relate to military service, I felt that I'm growing up and developing in a kind of environment of the freedom of the spirit and the freedom of imagination and freedom to dare whatever you think. It puts a lot of burden of responsibility not to take too much risky approach, but it makes you responsible. You know, somehow we used to say, you are the commander in the field, you are responsible to it. No one can help you from somewhere in some command post in the rear. And it shapes young people, you know, in a unique way, if they are ambitious in a way, if they are predisposed for leadership. And it might not be a kind of an incident that this small unit, which never consists of more than 50 or 60 people, fighters, kind of raised many of the commanders of the IDF, many future ranking generals, since it's once again at the high top of ranking generals that you need, once again, something that we educated to have, to acquire at very early age. That's the thinking of the overall picture, thinking of what should be the solution, feeling the lack of kind of limitations in our approach. To, you know, on the wing of this hijacked Sabina, we had future head of the Mossad, future head of deputy chief of staff of the Israeli army to these days, future chief of staff, two future prime ministers. Netanyahu was on the other wing together with me. And you can ask yourself, what's happened? Where is the egg and where is the chicken here? In such a familial environment as Israel was at the time, maybe it comes from both sides. It's the rumors about such a unit attracts some of the best and most motivated youngsters. And the environment gives these youngsters an opportunity to express themselves, to fulfill themselves, to thrive and grow with the responsibility. Nothing is similar, and everything changes. You know, the old Greeks used to say, "Pantare." Everything is kind of changing. But when I left the armed force after 36 years in uniform as the commander-in-chief of Israeli Defense Forces, I planned to go to civilian life. All my life I was stimulated by business activity. It looked to me something, the closest thing to war, where you don't kill the other guy, but you know, there is an active attempt of one to defeat most of the others, and certain of partial kind of cooperation, and the fact that you cannot act effectively unless you understand the whole picture and at the same time give attention to details, and that sometimes your defeat can come from someone that you don't even see at first. And it became clear after 2 months that Rabin wants me to come to join government. The last few years I was deeply involved in his effort to have the agreement with the Palestinians. As the top military authority, I have to express my views about what it means, what are the calculated risks that we can afford. And his effort to reach an agreement with the Jordanians, which ended up with a peace agreement with King Hussein. And I had a very close and warm relationship with King Hussein. It began years earlier during the Gulf War and even before. And then I was sent by Rabin to meet the Syrian chief of staff here at the Blair House, where, you know, I was just a civil servant. The Syrian chief of staff is the number 2 in the Syrian politics. He is a political figure and the closest friend at the time of President Assad. So I was somehow exposed to these kind of political kind of experiences in the sphere of security and foreign affairs. And Rabin, I had many hours with him. You know, he somehow transformed from being my mentor as a kind of military officer to my mentor in preparing me for kind of public life. And he called, I was here in the United States working with a think tank, with the Center for Strategic International Studies, became an associate kind of member of this think tank. And I enjoyed it very much, and I planned to go to business. And he called me and told me, Ehud, I want you to join my government as a Minister of Interior. I told him, Yitzhak, look, I just ended my service, 36 years. What difference it makes if I come after 38 years? There's something. So he reminded me something that he said to the whole audience when I left my office as chief of staff. He was just after a visit to Korea. And he told the whole audience when he farewelled me that he was just coming from Korea, and the new president of Korea told him, it was in 1995, that he is the first Korean president, head of state, that did not come from the rank of the general. So Rabin said, and I told him that I am the first Israeli prime minister, head of state, that came from the ranks of general. But Ehud, maybe I'm not the last one. And so he hinted that he wanted me coming to political life. And he called upon me, and he told me, Ehud, look, I cannot explain it, and I cannot prove it. It's not mathematics that you like so much. But in political life, timing is everything. You can never predict what will follow. I need you now. And so I left it, and after a legal kind of cooling off period of some 100 days, I came into his government. And no one of us even kind of contemplated or raised in his mind what really happened, that 5 months later Rabin was assassinated. I found myself immediately shocked but not out of balance, and entering Peres government as his foreign minister. And a few months later, Peres was defeated in the general elections, and Netanyahu took over. And within another few months, I became the leader of Labour Party. And So it happened that I came somewhat like a storm through political life. It never happened in the political history of Israel that someone who was totally out of political life became prime minister within 4 years and a half or something, being minister in 2 different portfolios before then. And, you know, it took Shamir some 7 years. It took Netanyahu 8 years. It took me 4 years. And I found myself a prime minister. I could hardly have enough time to think it, to contemplate about it. But I felt that certain kind of qualities are needed which are common to leaders in every aspect of life. The need for a some kind of inner sense of direction, some kind of inner compass, kind of predisposition to lead. That necessarily will occur to you, but there should be some kind of predisposition in your own genes and the overall imprint of your life experience that makes you predisposed to lead. You should be ready to take certain risks, to be able to make decisions in spite of uncertainties, and to dare to act in front of uncertainties. You should be able to somehow to be able to see the overall picture and not lose contact with the details and their crucial kind of importance in what will happen. You should have certain understanding of either human nature or the material that you are dealing with. But in my case, it's human nature. And you should be able to, I say, to think out of the box. Otherwise, you cannot just lead by kind of following the conventions and the trends. And I should admit that it's not the same in every area of life. It didn't took me more than one summer at the Weizmann Institute as a kind of freshman at the physics kind of department of the Hebrew University, and to realize that I will not be feeling kind of self-fulfillment if I become a kind of scientist as my father was kind of dreaming. When I went as a student through the works of Heisenberg and Schrödinger and not to mention the kind of top league, but of Einstein or so. It didn't take me a lot to realize that I would never be able to make these intellectual jumps that people like de Broglie or Max Planck or Heisenberg or Schrödinger made. You know, you could follow, you can know this is exactly. Now you know all what they knew before they made this quantum leap in human knowledge. And you see that clearly it's beyond never. I can never expect to, it would never come to my mind. And in other fields of life, it could come to my mind. It's the same like I knew very early in my life that I will not become a professional pianist. Just the kind of the fingers might not be adequate for this. But I didn't feel somehow deterred by it, but just felt as a young individual that I can take it kind of naturally, that there are things that I can do, there are things that I cannot do, and if I screen well enough, I will find something that will, where I can express myself. And I should admit that it was found in territory that I could not conceive at the beginning. Oh, I believe that the dominating kind of question of my youth, that somehow I found kind of having a kind of a role of super navigator in my life, was not the question of achievement, but somehow the question of meaning. What is the meaning of all this journey? And I remember that when I first met, kind of saying of John Maynard Keynes that in the long run we are all dead, that this is something that I felt from the very beginning. So in the long run we are all dead. So we have to find a meaning. There is something, the real motivation of human beings has to do with the meaning of what we are doing. And I believe that I found from early youth that meaning could be found only in something that goes beyond your own kind of frame of skin and bones and even self-interest. If something is serving you, if you can get the ultimate kind of hedonistic or self-indulgent situation, it will not satisfy you. I believe most human beings, I know for sure about myself, for very long. It's only through something that seems to be important, meaningful, has to do with a wider group of human beings and leave some imprint beyond your body and in a way beyond your time that makes life meaningful. And that somehow I was born in a kind of mobilized society as I see it in retrospect. It's a society shaping with a very strong feeling, unspoken feeling that we are facing history, that we are fulfilling the dreams of generations of Jews, especially immediately after the Holocaust. I passed my formative years when the remnants of the Holocaust were still coming. I still remember by going with my father from the collective dining room that I mentioned at the beginning, and ask him, pointing to one of these Holocaust, a young woman that came alone from Auschwitz or Majdanek, I don't remember. And she was taking a loaf of bread under her hand every evening from the dining room. And I asked my father, why Hanka was her name? Why Hanka is taking this loaf of bread? There will be breakfast tomorrow. There will be bread on the table. He told me what Hanka passed in her life will make her to her last day on earth taking this bread. She will never could be convinced that tomorrow there will be bread on the table. And so it's to a young kid of 5 years old or 4 years and a half. It kind of haunted me since then. And later on, through all these wars, I realized that we, the Israelis that were born about the middle of last century, slightly before, our generation did not learn the Alamo stories of his nation in the history books. We experienced them personally, once and again. It's a formative, personal, individual experience, a formative, collective experience of the Israeli society, the bringing about of a Jewish sovereign entity that can defend itself, stepping back on the stage of real history, not as a spiritual kind of heritage, but as a real way of life for a people that suffered so much. So it became the kind of mobilizing factor of my life, and it gave certain kind of meaning that you cannot think of it when you are have to be alert to touch the trigger a split second before someone shoots at you, you don't think about history and so on, but somehow it was a kind of shaping force for the whole generation that I was part of. And when I became older, I told young commanders that their role right now as young leaders is more complicated than ours. Since we could assume something that we didn't even give a thought to, that all our soldiers are somehow the product of such a society that is mobilized. So we could take many aspects of their behavior, including indirectly behavior under fire, as kind of self-evident. Something which is now should be, you should invest a lot of energy in convincing people that they should identify, that they should give this kind of account, that should go with the group. And in a way, it's a kind of maturity that the whole society get, but in a way, it made our kind of decisions simpler. But yet, I believe that at a very profound level, something very similar happens on every society in every generation. The real essence of it is not about achievement. Achievement is a means for certain people that has this predisposition to become leaders in whatever arena, to reach something more profound, which is meaning. And the need for meaning is something that connects them with the people they lead and with every other human being that search for meaning of life or in life. I don't know how to put it in English.